Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Today, we're heading to Bell Telephone Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey, on December 23, 1947, the day William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain successfully demonstrated the first working transistor. It was a small, barely visible device that amplified electrical signals and could switch them on and off. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. This invention, which looked completely insignificant at the time, enabled everything we think of as modern life: computers, smartphones, the internet, satellite communications, medical devices. Understanding why the transistor matters teaches us something crucial about how the most transformative innovations often look trivial at first, how systematic research beats lucky accidents, and why the ability to make things smaller is sometimes more revolutionary than making them bigger. Picture this. It's December 23, 1947, at Bell Labs. Three physicists, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley, are in a lab, working on a device that's smaller than a pencil eraser. It's made of germanium, gold foil, and a spring. It doesn't look like much, but when they apply voltage, something remarkable happens. The device amplifies the electrical signal passing through it. It works as an amplifier and as a switch. And it does this using solid-state materials. No vacuum tubes, no moving parts, no heated filaments. They've created the first working transistor. And although they don't fully realize it yet, they've just invented the foundation of the modern world. The executives at Bell Labs are shown the demonstration. They're impressed, but not overwhelmed. This is clearly important for telephone technology. That's what Bell Labs exists to improve. But do they understand they're looking at something that will change everything? Probably not. How could they? Here's the thing that I always wonder about. In that moment, did Bardeen, Brattain, or Shockley grasp the full implications of what they'd created? Did they understand that this tiny device would eventually enable computers small enough to fit in your pocket? That it would make space exploration possible? That billions of transistors would subsequently fit on a chip the size of a fingernail? Or did they just see a better way to amplify telephone signals? Let me build the clock for you, because understanding why the transistor was invented and what made it possible reveals something important about how innovation actually happens and why the most transformative breakthroughs often come from systematic research rather than lone genius moments. Think about it this way. Before the transistor, electronic devices relied on vacuum tubes. These were glass tubes with heated filaments inside, essentially light bulbs that could amplify or switch electrical signals. They worked, but they had severe limitations. They were large, fragile, power-hungry, generated heat, and burned out frequently. If you wanted to build a computer using vacuum tubes, and people did, it would fill entire rooms, require massive cooling systems, and break down constantly. Here's what the evidence tells us. Bell Labs wasn't trying to invent the modern world. They were trying to solve a practical problem: improve telephone switching systems. Vacuum tubes in telephone exchanges were expensive, unreliable, and required constant maintenance. Bell Labs wanted something better, so they assembled a team. Not one genius inventor, but a collaborative research group with different expertise. Bardeen was a theoretical physicist who understood quantum mechanics. Brattain was an experimental physicist skilled at building and testing devices. Shockley was a brilliant theorist who led the group and pushed them toward solid-state solutions. Think about what this reveals about innovation. This wasn't Thomas Edison working alone in his workshop. This wasn't a lone genius having a eureka moment. This was systematic research, funded, collaborative research that built on decades of scientific understanding of how materials, quote, conduct electricity. I find myself thinking about how Bell Labs actually worked. They gave scientists time to explore fundamental questions. They didn't demand immediate commercial applications. They fostered collaboration between theorists and experimentalists. They created an environment where breakthrough innovation could happen, not by accident, but by design. The transistor itself was built on years of prior work. Scientists had been studying semiconductors, materials that conduct electricity under some conditions but not others, for decades. They understood that certain materials could amplify signals. What Bardeen, Brattain, and Shockley did was figure out how to make it work reliably, control it precisely, and build a practical device. Now here's where my investigator's training becomes crucial. Because when you look at the evidence, at the notebooks, the failed experiments, the incremental progress, you see that innovation wasn't a flash of insight. It was methodical problem solving. They tried things, they failed, they adjusted their approach. They tried again. The successful demonstration on December 23rd came after months of failed attempts. Think about the position they were in. They were competing with other Bell Labs teams working on different approaches. They faced skepticism from colleagues who believed vacuum tubes were good enough. They were working with materials that were poorly understood and difficult to control. Success required not just intelligence, but persistence, collaboration, and systematic methodology. The demonstration worked. Bell Labs filed for a patent. But they kept the invention secret for months, continuing to refine it and better understand it. When they finally announced it publicly in June 1948, the response was muted. The New York Times buried the story on page 46. Most people didn't understand what a transistor was or why it mattered. We're still living in the world the transistor created, and I think this is where the story becomes especially relevant for us right now. Look around you. Every electronic device you use, computers, phones, cars, medical equipment, satellites, appliances, all of them depend on transistors. Not just one or two, but billions. A modern smartphone processor contains over 10 billion transistors. That's more transistors in your pocket than there were people on Earth when the transistor was invented. Here's what fascinates me. The pattern the transistor established, a small innovation that enables massive change, repeats constantly in technology. The transistor didn't directly change people's lives, but it enabled other innovations that did. It made computers practical. Practical computers enabled software. Software enabled the internet. The internet changed everything. In 1947, computers were room-sized machines that only large institutions could afford. By the 1970s, transistors made personal computers possible. By the 2000s, they made smartphones possible. Today, they will make artificial intelligence possible. None of this happens without the transistor. But here's the pattern that troubles me. We keep dismissing innovations because they don't look world-changing right away. When the transistor was demonstrated, most people didn't care. When personal computers emerged, many dismissed them as toys for hobbyists. When the internet became public, people said it was just a fad. When smartphones appeared, critics said nobody needed a computer in their phone. The evidence shows we're terrible at recognizing transformative technologies early. We look at them and see their current limitations rather than their potential trajectory. We see the clunky first transistor radio and can't imagine the smartphone. We see the room-sized computer and can't imagine the laptop. What stands out, the most important innovations, are often enabling technologies, things that don't directly change your life but make other innovations possible. The transistor enabled the computer. The internet enabled social media and e-commerce. Lithium-ion batteries enabled electric vehicles. These aren't the flashy applications. They're the infrastructure that makes flashy applications possible. I find myself thinking about this a lot because we're living through similar innovations right now. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and advanced battery technology are early-stage enabling technologies that most people don't fully understand or appreciate. 30 years from now, they might be as fundamental as the transistor, or they might fizzle out. It's hard to tell when you're in the middle of it. Think about the position we're in. We have new technologies emerging constantly. Some will transform the world, most won't, but we can't always tell which is which when they're new and limited. The transistor looked unimpressive in 1947. It wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s that its full impact became clear. The pattern also shows up in how innovation happens. Bell Labs succeeded because it invested in fundamental research without demanding immediate commercial applications. They gave scientists time to explore, to collaborate, to fail and try again. That model of research, patient, collaborative, systematic, produces breakthrough innovations. But we've largely abandoned that model. Companies now focus on quarterly earnings, on immediate applications, on short-term returns. Pure research labs like Bell Labs in its heyday barely exist anymore. We're optimizing for incremental improvement rather than breakthrough innovation. And we wonder why transformative innovations seem to happen less frequently. So, as we think about that December day in 1947, when three physicists demonstrated a device most people didn't notice or understand, I think the question for us isn't about celebrating one invention. The question is about how we enable breakthrough innovation and whether we're willing to invest in the systematic research that produces it. I respect what Bardeen, Brattain, and Shockley accomplished. They solved a complicated problem through systematic research, collaboration, and persistence. They built the foundation for the modern world. That's remarkable. But here's what I also respect. Bell Labs for creating the environment where that innovation could happen. The pattern is clear. The transistor succeeded because Bell Labs made long-term investments in fundamental research, assembled teams with diverse expertise, gave scientists time to explore and fail, and didn't demand immediate commercial applications. That's a model that worked. And it's a model we've largely abandoned. Think about what we've lost. Bell Labs produced 7 Nobel Prizes. They invented the transistor, the laser, information theory, the Unix operating system, and the C programming language. They enabled the digital revolution, and they did it by investing in research that lacked obvious, immediate applications. Now, research is increasingly driven by short-term thinking. Universities chase grant money for applied research. Companies focus on quarterly profits. Fundamental research that might take decades to produce applications. That's harder to fund, harder to justify, harder to sustain. I always come back to this principle. Build the clock. Don't just use technology. Understand how it works, why it works, what makes it possible. The transistor isn't magic. It's quantum mechanics applied to semiconductors. It's systematic research solving a practical problem. When we understand how innovation happens, we can create conditions for more innovation. Here's what gives me hope. The transistor shows that patient, systematic research produces transformative results. We did it once. We can do it again, but it requires long-term thinking, investment in fundamental research, collaboration across disciplines, and acceptance that most attempts will fail before one succeeds. But here's the problem. We want innovation without investing in the conditions that produce it. We want breakthrough technologies without funding fundamental research. We want the next transistor without creating the next Bell Labs. That's not how it works. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And here's why that matters today. The transistor teaches us that transformative innovations often look trivial at first, that systematic research beats lucky accidents, that enabling technologies matter more than flashy applications, and that breakthrough innovation requires patient, long-term investment without demanding immediate commercial returns. Yet we keep dismissing new technologies because they don't immediately look revolutionary. We keep defunding fundamental research in favor of applied research with quick returns, and we keep expecting breakthrough innovations while eliminating the conditions that produce them. If we cannot remember that the transistor came from Bell Labs' patient, systematic, collaborative research model, not from a lone genius or from chasing quarterly profits, we're condemned to keep missing the next breakthrough while complaining that innovation has slowed down. The question isn't whether transformative innovations will emerge. They will somewhere. The question is whether we're creating conditions for them to appear here, or whether we've abandoned the patient research that makes them possible. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, think about what enables innovation, whether we're willing to invest in research without immediate returns, and whether we can recognize transformative technologies when they still look unimpressive. Because that's what the transistor teaches us, not just about electronics, but about how breakthrough innovation actually happens when we build the systems that enable it.